couple years ago, I wrote a book with Peter Diamandis called Abundance that is about 4 emerging forces that allow us to massively improve global standards of living over the next 20 to 30 years, which is not what I'm going to be talking about. But to write this book, because it was such a radical idea to most people, I spent a very long time kind of looking at the neurobiology of pessimism. Why is it hard for so many people to believe the world is getting better? So I'm going to quickly walk you through these ideas. The fundamental problem is an information processing problem. So every second of every day, your senses gather about 400 billion inputs a second. 400 billion inputs are flooding into your brain every second. Your consciousness, meaning the world that you're actually aware of, is 2,000 outputs. So the vast majority of everything that's going on in the world, you're completely oblivious to. It is way too much information for the brain to process. So a lot of what your brain does along the way is it sifts and it sorts, and it tries to tease apart the critical from the casual. Since nothing is more fundamental to the organism than survival, the first stop most of this incoming information makes is the amygdala, which is essentially our danger detector. The amygdala is in charge of really powerful emotions: rage, hate, anger, fear. The fight or flight response is generated there. The amygdala is primed to look for danger. So it doesn't really matter what's in the room. As long as there's stuff there that scares you, that's what's going to catch your attention. So, for example, the old newspaper saw, if it bleeds, it leads, works, because all that incoming information is stopping first at an organ that is primed to look for negative news. So, on its own, not such a bad idea. But in today's world, with 1 million media channels competing for your attention, with our cell phones, our computers, our tablets, if it bleeds, it leads works because we're being pumped, filled with this negative information, and it's grabbing hold of the brain's attention, and it is not letting go because the amygdala is almost always on high alert. Now, there are a number of other issues here. The other thing is the amygdala evolved in an era of immediacy, when most of the threats we dealt with were the tiger and the bush variety. Today, a lot of the dangers we face are probabilistic. Terrorists might attack, the economy might nosedive, an asteroid might impact the Earth. But the amygdala can't tell the difference. And that danger response, that heightened fight or flight response, it cannot shut off until the danger is gone completely. Unfortunately, probabilistic dangers are never gone completely. So with the media constantly keeping us on edge, most of the dangers we're dealing with being probabilistic in nature, it is no wonder most of us think we're going to hell in a handbasket. Now, what makes this worse is a second portion of the brain's information processing hardware. So way too much information is coming in, right? So the brain has to sift and it sorts. It relies a lot of the time on information processing shortcuts. Now, when these work, these are called heuristics. So when we talk about common sense is a heuristic. It's a way for the brain to make very, very quick decisions on very, very little information. Most of the time, this works. But as Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman discovered, sometimes it fails. And when heuristics fail, we call them cognitive biases. Now, a lot of our cognitive biases also keep us pessimistic by design. Now, this is interesting. If you talk to scientists, they will tell you that we have a psychological immune system, which is, on an individual level, we are massively overly optimistic about our own chances in the world. So if I ask you, what are your chances of getting cancer, or getting a promotion at work, of winning the lottery, not getting struck by lightning, you're going to massively overestimate your ability to do these things. The flip side is, while the brain is individually optimistic, it's globally pessimistic. So it flips itself around. Your brain cannot process the globe on a giant scale, so it automatically is negative. Now, we have words for this. We have a negativity bias. And negativity bias is what I talked about earlier, right? If I show you 20 positive stories and 1 negative story, the negativity bias, because of the way the amygdala works, is what we're going to remember. We also have something called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency to believe that which we already believe and to ignore everything else. And this is really, really, really fundamental. You have to remember that you're going from 400 billion inputs down to 2,000 outputs. Huge bit of information to a very, very small chunk. So if I tell you something that does not confirm with stuff that you already believe, you are going to forget it. It's not going to register. Unless you're primed to look for new information, it's not going to come in at all. Now, on its own, possibly not such a bad thing, but in a world with millions of news outlets that are competing for your attention all the time and competing for it by pumping you filled with negative news, confirmation bias will keep you stuck in a rut. Speaking of being stuck in a rut, we also have something called loss aversion. Loss aversion is a very, very, very powerful cognitive bias. It's the idea that whatever you have today, if I take it away from you, you're absolutely convinced that whatever's going to come and replace it is going to be a lot worse. So I stand up here and I talk about taking us off of fossil fuels and replacing it with solar power. Instantly, loss aversion is going to tell you that a universe run on solar power is not going to be as good as the universe we have today run on fossil fuels. Add all these things together, one after another, and you start to see why it's very, 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 very difficult to believe that the world is in fact getting better. So that was my mini talk. Later we'll be talking about ultimate human performance, but thanks for listening.